Hi guys, welcome back to our tutorials here. My name is Helge from Pixeltrain. This year is the start of a new tutorial series, Blender for Production. I used to work as a 3D and VFX trainer for more than 20 years now, and I teach a lot of different 3D applications and also compositing software, for example Houdini and Maya. And Blender was always, the little bit the outsider, and in the last years suddenly this changed. And so I focused my work for 3D applications on Houdini and Blender, and what I found in my trainings is that there's a big interest in looking over what Blender has to offer, but some workflow ideas which Blender offers are sometimes a little bit, not standard, and so people are not aware what they can do, and also they are afraid that it doesn't fit into their pipeline. So what I want to do in this series, Blender for Production, is that I don't compare features, for example, what modeling feature Blender has now in opposite of Maya, for example, but I want to tell you a little bit about the modules Blender has to offer and how these modules inside of Blender are connected, because Blender is not only a 3D application, it's a full production suite. So you can do 3D, you can do 2D animation, you have a video editor, a sequencer inside of that, which you can use for video editing, yes, but also for animatic workflows, for example. And you have a Compositor, a 3D camera tracker, and so on. And so I find it really useful to first understand how these modules work together inside of Blender. And then maybe you in your production can find some tools which you like, which you can adapt into your existing pipeline, or you can also decide what's really hindering you to adapt Blender as one of the main tools. So in this first tutorial, I want to talk about the compositing background or the compositing environment inside of Blender. It's a node-based compositor, and in this first tutorial I first want to give you an understanding how this compositor is working with the Blender scene and which workflows you can do. And in the next one we talk a little bit about nodes, and from there we go on. So if you have any questions or wishes for this series, please let me know in the comments below. If you like these kind of tutorials, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. So let's get started here. In this scene I have a really simple animation, a soft body simulation running here. I've cached it so that's a little bit faster, and you see these soft bodies falling down. I have also here a ring which is emitting light into the scene, and we want to use this scene here for our compositing ideas. So let's start here first with understanding how the rendering inside of Blender is meant and how it is working. So the first thing you have to make sure is that you go here to the render properties, select your render engine, in my case cycles here. I set my sampling here to adaptive and not so high. I don't use the new denoising here for the renderer because I want to show you later how it's done in the post in the compositor. So I deactivated that here. And another thing I have done here is I went to performance because I'm capturing, and I fixed the threads here a little bit lower so that I don't use all my threads for rendering here, so that the capturing don't make any problems. Let's talk a little bit about the rendering process now. If you want to render a still, you can press F12, or you go here to the render menu and click here renderer. And the first interesting thing is this window here. So this here is a so-named image editor. Every panel here has an editor, and you can switch the editors here by this little drop-down menu, which is on the left corner here. And you see this here is an image editor, which you see. And inside of this image editor, we have three modes: view, paint, and masking. And we are in the view mode. So an image editor in the view node is meant for hosting images. So you can load images through the image menu into this image viewer, and you can save them out. So after rendering, you can go here and say save out this image, and if you go here now to save out, and you have this side panel open, it's the keyboard shortcut N if you like, or here this cogwheel, you can decide which format you want to use. OpenXR, for example, with multi-channels if you have multi-channels, or you can use PNG, and you make your settings, name it here, and you save this still image out. So nothing fancy here. But an interesting thing is here, this area here, and this is something you have to understand. You see, after rendering, you see here that we see something which is named a render result. And if you click here this little drop down, you maybe see that you have more than one entry here. You have a viewer node, you have a render result, and I have loaded something which is named Hello World. And you can switch here the thing which you see in this image editor around without losing your render result. So it's still stored inside of Blender's memory until you leave Blender and come back. And if you want to do something else now, you can click here this little unlink cross. So it's only unlinking, it's not deleting the image, it's still there. You also can close now this window here. And if you ever want to come back here, you can open every image editor, or you go here, say view render, and then you are back because here render result is still filled. So this is the first interesting thing. If you have more than one image in the memory, you can switch it in image editor and show here what you want to see. We come back to this concept later. If you have then a render result open, we have slots here. And these slots are really useful if you make comparisons. So you can switch here to another slot. So slot number 2, this is empty. And if you render now with different settings, you can compare them with slot number 1. And the keyboard shortcuts for switching slots is 1, 2, 3. So it's really logical that you use that. We are back on slot 1. And now we see something which is named a view layer. A view layer is something which we talk about in a more extensive style in a new tutorial. So it's the same like in Maya, for example, a render layer, and the view layer hosts all the render channels. So if you want to see the render channels, go to the view layer, and then you have here a drop down for all the channels which we have in the moment only combined and a depth pass. So that's here. And then we have this little switch here where you can decide which channel of the image you want to see. For example, you want to see the alpha or the red channel and so on. So that's here now. And like I've said, if you only make a still render, it's only delivered into the image editor and you have to save it. If you make animations, it's a little bit different. So you have to go here into the output properties, and here you set everything which is dimensions and so on. And then you go here to output, and there's a path, and you can tell now the system where you want to save this path. For example, you make a render folder here somewhere in your file system, and this path is only used with these files here if you render animations, because Blender doesn't host the whole animation in memory, so you need this path here. And another thing which is really interesting to know is post-processing. And now we come to this pipeline idea. After you have rendered an image, still or animation, the image is delivered over to the next editor, which is the Compositor in our case. So if you have activated the compositing nodes, which we do in a moment, then the image is directly delivered over to the compositing world, and you do there your magic. And after the compositor have finished, the image is delivered to the next editor, which is the sequencer, a video editor which is built into Blender, and we will talk about the video editor in its own tutorial. And if you have there a strip, it is filled with the result, and you can make, for example, your rough cut, or you can work with that, for example, for variants and so on. So the pipeline is built in. But it is not said that you have to use it like that. For example, I know many productions which don't deliver directly to the compositor. They only save out their image sequences to a folder, and then in a new Blender session or through a new artist and a new Blender session, they load the images back into the compositing context, so they don't have a 3D scene open. They only use the compositing and make their magic and save out the image sequence. So you can use both approaches, and I hope you will see how this works in this and the next tutorial. So this is a little bit of background. What we now want to do is we want to give Blender a little bit more channels so that it can work with. And for this, we use our view layer here. It's, like I've said, it's our render layer. We don't change that here in this tutorial, but if you have selected the view layer here, you go then here into this area, which is the view layer properties. So every view layer has its own properties. So like in Maya, for example, the render layers, every render layer has its own properties, and you can configure every layer here. And here you see, okay, in the rendering, you deliver a combined pass, which is the beauty pass, okay, then a Z pass, the depth. And now you can decide what you also want to deliver. I want to deliver, for example, denoising data. So to later show you in the next tutorial how you denoise in the post. Then I also want to deliver, let's do a mist pass, which is an interesting pass for adding mist or something like that. Then you can scroll down here and say, what do we want to deliver Cryptomat, for example, for objects and materials. So everything is done. And after you've clicked this here, you normally have to re-render because Blender has now to generate these passes for you. Before we do that, we switch over now into the compositing world. So we have here these nice tabs. If you don't see a compositing tab, you can go here to the plus and you see here different kind of workspaces which the Blender guys have configured you. So you can go here to compositing and add a new tab. So switch over. And this is now our compositor. Let's analyze what we see. We have here a dope sheet for animations. So you can comp animations here. Then on the left, we have our toolbar. You see it with the keyboard shortcut T on your keyboard, but you see it's not so useful. So I get rid of that by pressing T again. On the right side, we have the N menu, which I use all the time. So pressing N brings it. And in this, we have different tabs here, the items, tools, options, and view. And let's go through the most important ones. So first, we need some nodes here. And to use now the node-based compositing, you tick here, use nodes. And then you get two nodes here. I press the home key so that it zooms in where everything is. We have a render layers node. Again, the word render layer, which is a view layer inside of Blender. And you see, you select here the view layer which you want to see. We only have one here. So if you click here on the view layer, you see this little icon here or preview so you know what we have rendered. And here we have now on the view layer all the channels we've activated here. Great. But keep in mind, we haven't re-rendered. So these maybe are empty. And to re-render the whole thing, we can click here this little icon here, render the active scene. And then in the moment we do that, you see it reopens our friend, the image editor, and it re-renders now the whole thing. And if you now look here into the view layer, open this up, you see also here the channels. So you can look around if you, for example, see now the mist pass here. So, okay, let's go back, wait until the render is done. By the way, if you close this by accident or you don't want to see it and you want to see it again, you can go here to render and view render here, F11. And now you see this is the image now, and now we have filled everything here. So the render layers node is the connection to your last render. And that's exactly what we have seen here in, let's go here into the output properties post-processing. So this flag here says if we hold a little bit the mouse here, it delivers it over to compositing if compositing nodes are enabled. And that's exactly this tick here. So now it's here. Then we do normally our node magic to comp the whole image, and then it delivers the image out. And this is the composite node here. It's an output node. It's a really simple one. So at the end of your tree, you always need your composite node. And this composite node now delivers the image to the image editor again, so that you see the final image after compositing, or to our friend the sequencer if you use it. So that's the whole workflow. If you ever delete here a node, so I select this node, press the X here to delete it, you can use Shift A like everywhere in Blender, and then you can add nodes. And here under output, we have the composite node here. One of the questions which always come up is, what do I do if I want to load an image from hard drive and output it after compositing? So you don't want to use the render and all this fancy stuff. Really easy. If you add now an input node, you see here we can load in image sequences or multiple images if you like, or a single image or movie clip. So you can load everything here. So let's say I want to load an image here. And then if you want to output it at the end, you go here to output. And instead of using composite, which delivers it inside of Blender into the pipeline, you go here to file output. Then we have a file output here, and you can connect it. I connect it here with the render layer so that we see something. And if you select this now here, you have a path where you can save it. Let's go here to comp out and say this is direct output. Okay. Now you can decide what file format you want to use, for example, EXR. Okay. And here are some options, but this is only for the relative path. So I say save it. And now comes the next question normally. Yeah, but what if I want to make now an EXR with multi-channels, these channels into this file? Select this node and then go here to the N menu. If you go here to item, you always see the properties of the item which you have selected. In our case, the file output node. And if you open this properties up, you see there's a whole dialog here. So this thing here was too much to add it here, so you see everything here. So this is the path we've defined. Here we go to multi-layer EXR. You decide, okay, we want to deliver AGBA. We want to have it half or full float. So for example, full. And then we can add inputs here, or better to say, this is an output node outputs, but it's named input because it comes here in. And now you can connect, for example, if you want to connect now the mist here into the whole system, go here and say that image 1001 is not the best name. It's a mist pass, for example. And that's it. So that's the way you set everything up. And yeah, if you now press render again, so do your job, then this file output node delivers what you have set up here. And so in some workflows where you only load an image here and you do something and you have a file output node, you still press render for resolution and all this stuff, but you have an empty scene. You don't use any render layer input here at all, so you don't need this node. You only use the compositing background. So that's a little bit about that. I think we will talk about this later again, but so that's the difference. In our case, we really want to use the render layers here, and we want the composite here for the output. So we have re-rendered. Now we can talk a little bit about this interface here. The first thing I would recommend you all the time is to make some changes. First thing, always use the Node Wrangler. You see, I have Node Wrangler activated. If you never used Node Wrangler, go to Edit, Preferences, go to the add-ons and type in the word Node. The Node Wrangler is a free add-on which comes with Blender, so you find here Node Wrangler. You have to tick here this little tick and then it's active. You can read a little bit about the hotkeys here under Show Hotkey List. Don't be intimidated, it's a lot of hotkeys, but we only need some of them. But if Node Wrangler is active, you see here also in the N menu this menu here, and also under Shift W you see a special Node Wrangler menu where you can find some useful information. So that's the first thing you always do. Next thing is I change a little bit my keyboard shortcuts. So you normally add nodes inside of Blender with Shift A or with the add menu. That's great. But if you come from applications, for example, like Nuke or Houdini, which I use all the time, you're used to press tab, for example, and then you have a search field. You have a search field inside of Blender. If you press Shift A, you see here search, and if you click that, then you can search something. We want to use a glare node, for example, yeah, and then you have glare, enter, and then you have this glare node. But you always have to click 2 times, and what I do is I change a keyboard shortcut. So if you press Shift A, you can change everything, every keyboard shortcut by going over a command inside of Blender, for example, search, make a right mouse button click here, and then you can change the shortcut. And now I'm in changing the shortcut. I have to press the key which I want to assign now to this search field. And what I usually do, it's my idea of working with that. Shift A normally brings up the add menu, and if I now press Control Shift A, I want to have this as a search. Now you see my shortcut here, and if I now press Control Shift A, you directly get your search field. You type in what you search and you get it. So that's one thing I do all the time. And another thing is, if you go into the nodes and you go here, for example, to color, or let's filter, or whatever you want to use, you always find that some of the nodes you always use. So what I do, for example, is if you go here to color, we use alpha over and mix all the time. And so I want to have these nodes faster. You can make keyboard shortcuts, but in my case, I do it like this. I go to alpha over, make a right mouse button click, and this time we use here add to quick favorites. If you do that, it's added to your quick favorites. We see it, how it works in a moment. Then we go to mix, right mouse button click, add to quick favorites. And now test this. If you press the Q key on your keyboard, you see the quick favorites for this context. and now you have these two nodes. So really, really convenient to work like this. Okay, enough talking. Now we see this connection. If you want to add a node into a stream, you go over the stream and you see it is added here. If you want to delete a node, you can press the X key, but then you run into a small problem that the connection is gone. So I go back with undo. So if you want to delete a node without breaking the connections, you can go in here and make Command X. So the connection is not broken. So Command X deletes a node without losing the connection. It's really nice. And we have installed the node wrangler. So let's ask for a viewer. So if you want to see the result of something you do, if you come from Nuke, you always have a viewer, which you have on your number keyboard. So 1, 2, 3 for the viewer ports. Here inside of the Blender Compositor, we use a viewer node. You find the viewer node here under Outputs, Viewer. And if you have a viewer here, you see, if you select it, you get this here, which is a so-named backdrop. You also see it here in this menu here. You can activate and deactivate this. And to see something in the viewer, you have to make a connection. Okay, let's connect this here. And now you see that this viewer here delivers this backdrop, which I don't like too much. You see what we do with this in a moment. But this backdrop is the result of that. So you've seen you have to make the connection. So if you now go in here, let's add a glare node with our new keyboard shortcut. Glare, add it here. Now you want to connect this viewer to this point here. And you don't want to remove that, do it again. What you can do, because you have activated the node wrangler, you hold down Command Shift and you click onto the node which you want to inspect. And now you see that the viewer is connected to this node. You also can connect here to the composite, to the render layer, to the glare again, and this is a really convenient way. What you also can do is you can directly tell the viewer which port you want to see. So if you go to the render layer here, you have activated the first port. And every time you click again with the left mouse button and Control Shift, you run through all these output ports. But if you have many of them, it's really a waste of time. So if you only want to see the mist pass, Control Shift and you click here at the output of mist. And so the connection is done. You directly see what's going on. So really convenient to work like that. And I see I haven't rendered it completely. So let's trigger the render really fast and bring it to the background. Okay, so this is the viewer. And when I'm working normally, I take the composite node here, I deconnect it, and I only keep it here or you add it later. So I first work only with the viewer. And if you have finished your work, then don't forget, if you want to use now render and the image viewer to save, then you still, or you want to use this composite tree for everything, add it at the end by yourself. So I don't think about this composite node. I first only think about the viewer. Let's talk now about this backdrop thing here. If you activate the viewer, you can grab it here in the middle and move it around. You also have now these handles here, which you can use to move it somewhere, scale it, and all of that. If you have deactivated the viewer and you want to move it, hold down Alt and the middle mouse button, so you can move it around if you like. Or you can go here directly to the end menu view, and there is the backdrop options here for zooming, offsetting, resetting, fitting, and moving around. So this is the backdrop. If you want to get rid of it, here is the backdrop option. And here you can tell also which channel you want to see in the backdrop. Like I've said, I'm not the biggest fan. So what I do instead is I open here a new panel. So dragging here in the rounded corner. And then in this window here, I switch now my editor type to our friend, the image editor. And we make sure that we are in the view mode. And if you now go back into our list we've talked about, you see now our outputs again. And now comes the interesting part. You see that our image at the moment is glared here. So let's maybe change it to fog glow so that, yeah, it looks a little bit nicer. Okay. If we go in the image editor and say, show me the render result, you see our render result. But if you go now here and say, show me the viewer node, yeah, and this is this viewer node here, you see now the output of the viewer node. And that's much more convenient as having this thing here in the background. So I normally deactivate now the backdrop, and I have this image viewer here open to see my result, what I'm doing. And the nice thing is you can switch here around between different images. You also can save out, so you don't need the composite workflow here, because if it's delivered to the viewer, you can go here to Image, Save As, and save out this image here directly. Works for stills, so that's okay. And another thing which is important is that you have sometimes in nodes, I think there's a light beam node or something like that. Let's search for it. Yeah, sunbeams is the name. You sometimes need here, let's connect these two. I select these two and press the F key, like fill in the 3D view, then it connects it, and make a Control-Shift click here onto the sunbeams. What you normally have here is that you go in here and search here for a center. And you see, if I go now to the ray length, you see now you get these beams here. But the problem is you have to do it here manually. If you have a backdrop, this node here has a widget. So sometimes the backdrop is useful, but in most cases I use only here the image editor. But keep that in mind. If you are missing a widget, maybe it's in the backdrop and you can use it here, and you can switch it on and off all the time. So let's talk at the end of this tutorial a little bit about performance. So if you go now here into your compositor again, and you go here to the options in the end menu, you see here now your performance. In the rendering, you want to have a high performance. If you are editing, I normally switch to low performance so that you can work a little bit faster here. You have the chunk size, so how big the render buckets are. You can use OpenCL if you think that's helping you. We have here buffering of groups, so if you have groups defined, Blender buffers to pass if we like. And if you change something in 3D, you can trigger auto render here if you like. So some of these performance settings are really useful. So let's get rid here with X, and we go back, Control-Shift, click here to the glare node. And what we now want to do is, I switch here to fog glow. We found here a size. And the question is, why do we see this wonderful glare here at this area here? The thing is, this ring here is really bright. And let's deactivate this node here for a moment. So select the node and press the M key, like mute, to get rid of that. And if we now want to sample colors, you can use your right mouse button here in the image viewer. And then you see in the status line the values here. You see RGB, A values, and the position and so on. And you see that these values are normalized. They are between 0 and 1. So 0 means black, 1 means white. And if you go here to the white area, for example, of this checkerboard, you see we are really dark here in the whole thing, so under 0.5. But if we go here now to this ring and we sample these values, you see we have values here in the blue channel of 50, which means 50 times brighter than white. And that's the reason why glare works so well, because its threshold is set to 1. So everything which is white, it's 1, or above is used here for the glow. And if you want to change now these parameters, you remember I said sometimes this here is really small and you can't really work with these values. Remember that in the end menu, if you go here to items and you have opened the properties, you always see the properties of the node which you work with. And so this is much bigger and this is much nicer to work with. So you can go here to low, so that's faster. Then you go here to size, bring it down, whatever you want to do, and so on. You also can label a node here if you like. You can color a node here if you like. So if this node is really important for a colleague or whatever, you can do it here. So really nice settings here. Yeah, and that's it. So I think this is a good introduction for the first steps inside of your compositor. Like I've said, we only see the thing at the moment in the viewer. What you now can do is you can save out your image here directly. We've talked about this. Or you say, I want to have now my whole animation with this cool glow. So let's go back here to the layer, make a high quality of that. Takes a while, you see. We have to go back here to 12, for example, to have a little bit of more glow going around here. And so if you want to do it in animation, don't forget to use your composite node now. Okay, composite is on. And what I now do is I go back to, for example, layout. I make now sure in my output settings that I have an output path set here. So let's go here, comp out, and we name this here in a new folder, animation with glow. So go into that animation. Then I make a dot and pound signs, which is the numbering, and we want to have EXR at the end, but we have to set this now here. So we want to have multi-layer EXR, half float, for example. Everything is set here. And what we then can do is we set here the frame range, which we like. Everything is fine here. And then we go here to render animation. And what you now see while it's rendering, first you only get your render. So this is the job it does before the render layer. And then after the rendering, it delivers directly the image over to your compositing tree, which we've built, and through the composite node, it outputs it again here, and then it saves it. Here we are. So I hope this helped. My name is Helge from pixeltrain. If you have more questions, please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And in the next tutorials, we talk about more nodes and the integration. So have fun and see you next time.